Program guidelines. This is universal, but specifically for the 2027 program, we're looking for innovative, high-risk applications that show promise for contributing to significant advances in the chemical and life sciences. We want to support early career scientists. So we do that by requiring that you are an early tenure track professor. We want to fund projects that represent a departure from work that is currently being done in your lab, or things that you're working on as a postdoc. And then projects are funded for up to 4 years. We provide $150,000 annually in support, and this amount is directly to your lab. We don't allow for overhead, so every dollar goes directly to you. Oops, sorry, trying to admit people at the same time. All right, so eligibility for 2027, early tenure track within the first 4 years. So you must have started after 1/1/22 and before 7/31/26, which is when the LOI closes this year. Applicants are required to be citizens or permanent residents by the time of the interview. So I'm going to quickly dive into this because I know this can cause some confusion. If you are in the process of applying for permanent residency, you are eligible to apply. You're eligible to submit a letter of intent. You're even eligible to submit a full application if you're still awaiting documentation. However, by March 16th, 2027, we will need to confirm that you've received permanent residency. We will need that documentation in order to maintain eligibility. And this is because the foundation is restricted to only funding citizens and permanent residents. So we want to give you the best chance possible by allowing you to get as far as you can in the application system. But at some point there is a cutoff, and this program cycle, it's March 16th, 2027. The next guideline is no more than $225,000 in external annualized direct funding. So this does not include startup funds. This does not include transition grants. A transition grant is something you would have received as a postdoc. So this is just anything external, not within your institution, that only your institution could apply for, and then it's broken down annually. The foundation does not support clinical research or clinical trials or government laboratories. Applicants can apply a maximum of 2 program cycles, and submitting an application includes a letter of intent. It's not just a full application. And then lastly, we do have a sort of 10-year limitation. So you have to be no more than 10 years post-terminal degree. So that would be PhD 1/1/16 or later. And then for MD PhDs, it would be residency completed no later than 1/1/16. And then lastly, no more than 5 years experience in a non-tenure track position, but this does not include your time as a postdoc. This would be your time potentially in industry. Program timeline. So letter of intent obviously is open. It closes. Oops, I'm so sorry. I should have updated this. It's usually August 1st. This year it's the 31st of July, Friday. The full application notifications will go out in November, and those are due in January, usually the second week of January. And then interview notifications will go out in early April, and the interviews are conducted in late April. Since 2020, these have been conducted virtually. So you'll get a notification with the time frame, and you will not have to get on an airplane. This is something we would be doing over Zoom. In case you're not aware, we do have several resources beyond this webinar today. So we have a really detailed instructions document. We have 2 examples of successful pre-proposals written specifically for the LOI, so blinded. We have a guidance document to assist in the writing of the pre-proposal. And then we have obviously our FAQ. I also have the webinar recording up there that I did a few weeks ago. These can all be found on our website under helpful guides and program information. Cristina was also very generous in letting me record this today, so I'll put this on the website as well when we're done. All right, so the actual application itself, as I'm sure you've seen, it's a 4-page pre-proposal. This is inclusive of images, references, and citations. This also includes a bio sketch. You need to use the template that's provided. We have a current funding chart, and then 2 institutional signatures from the chief academic officer and the dean, but these can also be similarly authorized signers. As I mentioned, this is a blinded review, so the only document that reviewers will see is your 4-page pre-proposal. These other documents are just viewed by me to confirm eligibility. So some instructions for the blind review. So please obviously do not include your name, gender, any institutional information. You're encouraged but not required to write in third person. Sometimes it's just easier that way. Please do not name any collaborators, mentors, postdoc advisors, lab members. It's very easy to identify people with that information. If you include references to your own publications, we ask that you don't use any special formatting markings to identify yourself. And if you have any unpublished work, we like to suggest that you write it something like this. Just basically applicant name withheld is the best way to go about it. So the current funding chart, several years ago, we required, in addition to current funding, pending funding. This actually might have been something that you had to do, Christina. So maybe this is the one change. So we don't require pending funding anymore. We just want to know current funding. So the money that you actually have right now. It gets entered into this chart and broken down. So as an example, if you have a grant that is $200,000, but your direct amount is $100,000, just going to split that in half and assume you're receiving 50% each year. You're going to go ahead and put $50,000 into each of these boxes. And then at the bottom, it will automatically tally that to confirm that you are at or under $225,000. So it's a really simple chart. It can't accept commas, things like that. So make sure you're double checking that and that the dollar amounts are adding up accurately before you submit. All right, I went over this at the webinar, and I think that this was helpful because the institutional endorsements cause a lot of confusion. I just want to clarify that these are not letters of recommendation. These are not, this is not documentation that you have to upload. This is simply an electronic signature that two members of your institution have to sign off on. So basically, the endorsers are agreeing to the materials that you've submitted or are going to submit, that they agree to the terms of the Young Investigator program as stated in our guidelines, and that they would continue to support you in the way that they are currently, should you be awarded. So when you go to request a letter, an endorsement, this example was using institutional endorsement 1. You're going to hit the request a recommendation button. You're going to fill out a first name, last name, email, an optional message, and then send request. So when you are done, you have the option to either resend the request should the endorser have not received your email or got stuck in spam, or you can withdraw and send it to somebody else, just so you know. If you need assistance, I'm happy to help you with that, but you do have that option to do that on your own. When the endorser receives your request, they'll receive a really simple email that will just ask them, do you want to give the recommendation or you decline? If they say, yes, I want to give the recommendation, they are literally just signing electronically. It's very, very simple. And then once they sign, you will get an email from the system letting you know that your endorsement has been completed. And then when you receive that email, you do have to go back into the system and mark that stage as complete, which is just the same as all the other stages. So just to let you know, it won't be submitted fully until you go back in and hit mark as complete. I guess last thing to just be stated about the endorsement is you can get someone who is authorized to sign for the chief academic officer or the dean. That is totally fine. And sometimes these are just people at, sponsored research. So I would reach out to them first and ask who they suggest should sign off on this. It generally is not going to be the chief academic officer. It's very rarely the chief academic officer. Okay, so the review process, our reviewers consist of former awardees and other scientists with the rank of associate professor or higher across the US. Applications are reviewed online by 3 reviewers, and then we have a selection meeting. At the end of the letter of intent review, we are looking to advance roughly 100 applicants to the full application stage. Full application, should you be invited, you'll receive an invitation, of course. The application will open in usually early to mid-November. And you must continue to remain at or under the $225,000 in annual direct external funding. So if for some reason you receive funding between submitting your letter of intent and the full application that exceeds 225, you are unfortunately no longer eligible. If you receive note of that after you submit your full application, you are still eligible. So the full application is essentially the cutoff. to maintain that 225. If you receive funding after that, you're still safe. The only issue would be if you do not win this award, you would not obviously more than likely be eligible to apply next year, but it wouldn't impact your eligibility for the current year. And then lastly, the interview stage, we are looking to interview roughly 20 applicants. And then, like I said, it's sort of TBD how many we'll be able to fund, but 10 is generally our target. And then the interviews are conducted by members of our executive committee. So then just to wrap this up, as I mentioned, awardees receive $150,000 each year. You do have the option to apply for a no-cost extension at the end of year 4. So this would basically give you 5 years to spend down the money. The money itself is quite flexible. You can use this to cover, obviously, salary, equipment. We do have something unique where you can use up to $10,000 annually to use toward child or elder care for both yourself and eligible members of your lab, as long as they're working at least 50% on this project. You can also use this for training and mentorship. And then lastly, awardees are invited to attend our symposium. This is held annually, usually in July or August. This year it's July and August. It's July 30th through August 1st. So this is my information just in case you need it. I'm happy to answer questions regarding the program. As a reminder, this is due July 31st, 5 p.m. Pacific time. That does roll into our symposium. I am the symposium lead, so I am really hard to get a hold of the last couple days of the month. However, up to that point, I am more than happy. This program is my priority. So if you reach out to me, I will absolutely get back to you. I just ask that you be mindful of that time toward the end of the month because of the event. And also it has happened in the past where if you wait to the last minute, Cristina and I were just talking about this, sometimes the system can freeze and it causes a lot of confusion and issues. So please try to submit at least 10 minutes before the deadline, because if you exceed the deadline, there really is nothing that I can do to help you. So my contact information is here. Let me turn it over now to Cristina to go through her slides, and then we will get started on questions. So just give me one moment. Oops. Okay, so Cristina, you should be able, hang on one second, to take control now.
Perfect. Can you see my slides?
Yes, looks great.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, well, thank you for the intro at the beginning, Nicole, and thank you to all of you for attending the mentor hours. I attended these office hours when I applied for the LOI a couple years ago, and then also before the full proposal, and I found it to be very, very useful. So hopefully you will also find it useful. So I am an assistant professor at Yale University in the Department of Biomedical Engineering. I'm also a Beckman Young Investigator from 2024. And so I'll spend the next 15 minutes or so telling you a little bit about what I know about the application, some things that I think are, important to consider, especially when it comes to how different this may be from other proposals that you've written. So, okay, a little bit about me so that you know where I'm coming from. So my research is, I'm actually a physicist by training. I now work at the interface between optical instrumentation and microscopy development and neuroscience. So we develop a lot of optical microscopy techniques for deep tissue imaging in living animals. Our main model organism is mice, so we do a lot of tool development for imaging the brain and the spinal cord. Specifically, we use a technique that's called 3-photon fluorescence microscopy combined with other tools so that we can image deep and with subcellular resolution. So that's where I'm coming from. I started my lab in January 2023, and I applied for the BYI letter of intent in August of that year. So I had only had my lab for about half a year, and I don't even think I had an actual lab by then. So hopefully, some of you might already be a couple years into having your own lab. Some of you might be starting. but that gives you a sense for, like how, I guess, early you could apply. We can talk about preliminary data later, but, obviously, like I didn't even have a lab. So that tells you how much preliminary data I had or didn't have. So my funded project is this imaging platform for non-invasive subcellular resolution imaging in the mouse spinal cord. Okay, so like I said, I attended the mentor office hours session before applying for the LOI. And, again, the advice that I got was very, very helpful, again, because it's a very unique mechanism. So, okay, one of the most important things that we can, again, tell you is that this is very different from, let's say, a standard NIH proposal. So the Beckman Foundation was, of course, created in the spirit of Arnold Beckman himself, who was a chemist who built instruments that, didn't exist, and he did it because science really needed those instruments. So I think that's something that's really useful to keep in mind as you, craft your proposal. So because of this, right, the foundation sort of sits at this intersection between fundamental science and applied science and new tools. In my case, I'm coming from, I'm a physicist, I'm doing a lot of microscopy development, but with the ultimate goal of answering questions in neurobiology that we couldn't answer without those tools. So again, you think about things that will open new frontiers in science. So again, for this program, you want to make sure that you're thinking big picture, think of long-term goals, more about this in a second. You want to make sure that the vision is clear. You're thinking high risk, high reward. There's this big idea that you want to go after. And again, ideally, you're bridging multiple fields. So again, very different from at least some of the standard mechanisms via the NIH or NSF or DoD. So I think our general recommendation would be don't try to repackage or recycle an NIH proposal, because that might be very, very different. So, and reviewers can tell immediately if that's done. So, okay. Now, what does that mean more concretely? So using the language from the Beckman Foundation is very useful here, right? So this program was created really to foster the invention of methods, instruments, and materials that will open up new avenues of research in science. So your proposal, right, ideally should bring together maybe 2 or 3 fields in a new way. You should be able to articulate what the long-term vision is, right? So the proposal is for a project, right, that will span 4 years, but that long-term vision, what is it that this, project will enable? That has to be very clear. It has to feel risky, right? If it's too safe, then it's probably not compatible with this mechanism. And it also has to be clearly something that's new for you. If it looks like a very obvious extension from your postdoc work, that might not be great. It doesn't mean that, of course, you're using that as that's part of your experience, but it can't be this very obvious incremental continuation. So some things to watch out for. Again, don't recycle your existing NIH aims. Again, anything that looks too much like it's a continuation from your postdoc. I don't know, something that a bunch of other labs are doing, and also being very incremental or overly cautious, right? You want to think big here. So let's talk about structure. Whatever your field, the letter of intent for the BYI should ideally follow sort of these different stages throughout the proposal. So you want to make sure that you set the stage, right? Briefly introduce the field. What is the big question, right, that you want to answer or that the field wants to answer? And what is the state of the art? Be very clear about what the obstacle is. So why is it that the field has not been able to answer this question? What is there a structural barrier? What is the reason? What's your unique approach? So what's innovative about what you're proposing? Why are you in a unique position to answer that question? How different is your approach compared to what already exists? All of this has to be very clear. We will come back to this point in a second, but you have to keep in mind that the reviewers are coming from very, very different fields. You're lucky if you get someone that's from your field. So, they're not going to go out and research what the state of the art and, what are the limitations. You have to, in a very brief way, do that for them very concisely. They're going to take your word, but it has to be clear. It has to be there. And then the impact and vision. So where is this going in 10, 15 years? What does a successful outcome enable? And how will
Well,
your um, how will your findings impact society?
briefly.
I think someone is unmuted. Okay,
Uh-huh.
thank you. So key principles to keep in mind throughout, regardless of where you are in your proposal, at the beginning, the intro, the end is, well, for the first part, you want to get in quickly. Don't linger on background. And we will come back to this, but you want to make sure that on the first page, even on the first half page, it has to be clear what you're proposing, right? What are the limitations? What's the field? Why have people not been able to answer this question and what your proposal is about? So this needs to be brought up to the first page. Every sentence has to earn its place. 4 pages, that goes by very, very quickly. Some repetition will be unavoidable. In fact, it's a good thing. There are some ideas that you do want to make sure that you bring that back, a few times, right? So that reviewers will remember it. Reviewers will span many fields, so avoid jargon without definitions. And if it's not necessary, then simply skip it. High risk, high reward mindset throughout. So be bold, nothing that sounds like too incremental and too small. And of course, being assertive helps here. But of course, the proposal has to be technically sound. Okay, so I've said a few times that the opening of your proposal or that first page is very important, even that first paragraph. So how should we think about crafting that opening? So typically, and you don't have to follow these, point by point. So like take everything with a grain of salt. But this I think can help you guide how you want that first paragraph to look like. So you have some statement of fact, right? That's, I don't know, like field X matters because blah blah, something that no one is going to argue with in a sense. Okay, current efforts. So it could be something like existing tools approach, this problem via X and Y. It has to be a brief setup, right? You don't necessarily want to do a full literature review here, but you want to say something. What the limitation is. So, you say existing tools, blah, blah, blah. However, these approaches kind of do X and Y. So you want to explain what that limitation is. You want to explain why. Why is it that limitation is there? Why can't they do that? Or say something that is not fully understood. That's sort of the gap in knowledge or the gap in some technology. So that has to be very clear. And then, of course, what your proposal is about. So, we propose to develop, blah, blah, blah. So that, of course, has to be, you can underline or bold it. So that's sort of the thesis of the whole document. And there should be no mistake, right? When you read that first paragraph, that's what you're proposing to do. So again, end that opening paragraph with a single unmistakable sentence that's saying exactly what it is that you propose to do. So I will show you an example from my own letter of intent on how that first paragraph looked like. It's not perfect. No grant in retrospect is perfect. There's probably some things that I could have tweaked, but the main idea and the main structure is there. So, okay, so that's the title of my proposal. So it's new optical technologies for deep tissue imaging of the spinal cord. And okay, so I start saying that the spinal cord is the central communication channel between the brain and the body, blah, blah, blah. Again, that's the statement of fact, something that no one's going to argue about. And, I say how, understanding how spinal cord circuits process somatosensory information is critical because when they malfunction due to injury or disease, then the consequences can be devastating, including X and Y. Okay, so that's, again, so this is why this is important. And then I say why we haven't really been able to study these circuits from a population level. perspective, and that is largely because of unique anatomical features of that region, which prevents standard tools for, say, optical recording from reaching deeper layers. So I'm saying what the limitation is, why that is in this case. I'm talking about those anatomical features. And this is essentially why we know so little about how these circuits work. And then I very briefly say what my proposal is about. So it's a platform for deep tissue, non-invasive and large field of view imaging of the structure and function of spinal cord circuits with synaptic level resolution. Very high level, but if there's, I don't know, a chemist reading this proposal, he's going to be like, okay, it's this spinal cord, you can't image it because of X and Y, this person proposes to do blah. Okay, so that's one example. You can, again, add a few more details. Or you could expand a little bit more on some things, but that's the key idea. Okay, how about the aims? Again, this is very general advice, and some things, it just might work very differently for you, but rule of thumb, maybe about 3/4 of a page per aim, including one figure per aim. Keep it high level, right? This is essentially months of proposed work that you're essentially putting into, one paragraph or a couple paragraphs. So it'll, of course, have to be very concise. So you want to probably start with a motivation and overview. So one sentence or so about why that matters, on what's the gap that it's addressing, a summary of what you're proposing. So what will you accomplish in that aim? What the approach is. You want to add some experimental detail written plainly, right? Again, remember, this is written for a very broad audience, in a way that you're justifying your design choices briefly, but you do not have time to go into all of the experimental details as you would, say, in an NIH R01. And then the outcomes and the innovation. So like if you succeed in that aim, what's going to become possible? So restate what's novel, and then you could close with the ramifications. So ideally, the aims should be independent, not sequential, but of course they have to be thematically linked. This doesn't always work that way, but this is a general rule of thumb. I've mentioned this a few times, but do keep in mind that you're writing for a broad audience. So your reviewers will be highly intelligent scientists from very diverse fields. You're lucky if you get someone who's in your field. So definitely write for the non-experts in the room. The idea is that every reviewer will walk away thinking, okay, this is really a problem. I didn't know about this, or maybe they did. The approach is exciting, and I want to hear more. So especially when you're writing that first paragraph, that's how the reviewer should feel like. It's like, okay, this sounds super exciting. I want to read the rest of the proposal. Be concise and direct. So again, it's 4 pages. So that's going to that's not a lot of space. So be direct, and you don't want to make reviewers work to understand what you're saying. So try to be as clear as possible. Don't assume that they know things that might be obvious for you. Minimize jargon. So define the technical terms that you do absolutely have to use. And when you first use them, and if something is not strictly necessary, just don't use it. Let's say you're a physicist. So that's my case, right? I'm a physicist. I'm writing about these optical tools. If I give this proposal to a biologist and they get completely lost, that's not good. Or the other way around, right? Like the person maybe, reviewing, let's say that your LOI is a physicist and you're a biologist and you're writing about these things that they have no idea about. So that's what you have to keep in mind. Show, don't just tell. So a well-designed figure is worth 400 words. More on this in a second. So make sure that you put a good amount of effort into your figures. So speaking about that, make sure that your figures are doing the heavy lifting. So of course, use them strategically. You can save space. Like a well-designed figure allows you to save space. And okay, figure 1. And again, this is one way to organize this, but figure 1, a good strategy is to use that to show both what the problem is and what the proposal goal is. It doesn't necessarily have to have data. It could all be diagrams or minimal amount of data. if any, but that's where you want to show this is, the gap that exists in the field and what your proposal will achieve. Again, first page, remember, you read that first paragraph, you see that first figure, it's very clear what's happening in this proposal. So think of figures as a visual argument that stands on its own. So from establishing the problem to building the case for your approach to showing where you're headed. Some people imagine if they were skimming through your proposal and they only look at the figures and read through the captions, they should have a pretty good idea of what this proposal is about. Now, one possible approach is that you do one figure per aim. So then that's your 3 figures plus that first figure at the beginning that summarizes the problem and the goal. So that's about 4 figures. Again, at least for the aim figures, they should summarize the approach and the goal. Don't clutter. One clear message per figure. Don't use tiny captions or labels. Make sure that if you print the proposal out and you read it, you will be able to read all of the captions. And as I said, this is one possible approach. In my own LOI, that wasn't necessarily the best. So what I did is I used figure 1 as, this is where I established what the goal and the gap was. So that I did. But then the subsequent figures introduce key components of say, the technology or what some of the limitations were, really to demonstrate feasibility. And then the final figure presented the core technology that the lab was developing. And that's what worked in my specific case. So for the first figure, it was something like this, very simple, right? I'm showing a diagram that shows a cross-section of the spinal cord. I'm showing what current microscopy modalities, which is in yellow, how deep they can image. I'm showing basically what this new microscopy modality can do and sort of what the proposal goal is. And of course, that coupled with the text and in that background paragraph, and then in the rest of that page, it very clearly states what the problem is and what we're trying to achieve. So that's one example. A few other things to include, again, the 10-15-year vision. So even though the foundation is funding you for 4 years of work, reviewers want to make sure that this is really starting something bigger. Not that you're going to, finish those 4 years and then done, right? This is over, you do what you had to do, and then you move on to something completely different. Like this should be opening up, right? Something bigger. And then make sure that you include contingency plans. So if X doesn't work, then we're going to try Y, or we envision that, we might encounter problems in this specific part. If so, then, we will look into whatever X and Y. Do make sure that you include even a short paragraph on this. A few other things to keep in mind for the BYI letter of intent. Again, front load your main idea. So from page 1, reviewers have to know what it is that you're proposing, what's the gap, and how you're planning on addressing that. The LOI is blinded, so if you have more questions about this, we can go through it in the Q&A, but make sure there's no self-referential citations. They will take your word on feasibility. So essentially make the science compelling on its own. Preliminary data is not required, so you need some rationale and and feasibility, but it could be some things that you have from your postdoc work, either published or unpublished. Maybe you have some simulations. But like I said, I applied for these 6 months into my faculty position. Institutional endorsements, Nicole talked about these. Do start early because it can get confusing. I think I had some of those hiccups happen to me. So I think if you make sure send those notifications early, do reach out to the people who will perform the endorsements and make sure that they receive the email and make sure you do that way before the deadline. Let's see. Yeah, write clearly. We talked about this. Be direct, and then of course don't propose incremental science. We talked about this at the beginning. If you do have more questions after today, you are free to contact me. My email address is here, and I'll be happy to help if you have specific questions on, I don't know, anything as you write your proposal. Okay, Nicole, should I stop sharing?
Yes, and thank you so much. That was a really wonderful presentation. I was emphatically nodding at every slide, so completely agree. I see we have one message in the chat, so why don't we start there? And then for questions incoming, anyone is welcome to, like I said, you can stay off camera. If you want to come on camera, that's fine. Raise your hand, however you want to go about it. But we want to hear from you. We have about 20 minutes. So there's a question. I think this is for you, Christina. Should these be aims that build on each other, or is it better for these to be workable in parallel?
So usually the advice is that aims should be independent. I do think that in some cases, I will say in my specific case, my first aim is developing this microscopy platform, right? And then let's say that the subsequent ones do rely on that microscopy platform because it's more the application, the in vivo application, and how we're going to study certain questions. So it's kind of like you could frame it in a way that they're more independent, such that if, I don't know, this part of aim one doesn't work as expected, we will still be able to look at this problem because whatever X and Y, does work already, or I don't know, but there might be some dependency. But I think oftentimes when you work developing tools, that's unavoidable, right? It could work either way. Nicole,
Yes.
from looking at proposals, do you have anything to add on this?
No, I completely agree. It's a difficult question to answer. I don't think there's one right answer, and I think both of those are accurate. Yeah.
I mean,
We have another
so
question in the chat, but someone raised their hand beforehand, so let's
sorry.
take that one first. I think it was
Can I
Siddharth.
ask a
Sorry, I'm getting confused. I had a hand raised.
Sorry. Yeah, is this on?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Christina, for that presentation. So the question I really want to ask is, how is a departure from your current work really measured? So if we have like preliminary data that the technology in print, we've got it to work for like one instance, and then the proposal is like, here are these 20 other instances that we want to basically expand it to. Is that considered a departure, or like is that just like more like me too?
No, it's a good point because I think, when you start, even when you're applying for faculty positions, this always comes up, right? So you got a faculty position, which means that
Mhm.
you were able to successfully show, right, that you're proposing something that in a way is different enough from what you were doing. So, but this point is always confusing, right? Because of course, like if you're doing something completely, absolutely different, then the reviewers will wonder, well, how are you going to do this, right?
Yeah.
So it is fine, right? It is fine that, I mean, I'll tell you in my case, right? It's still the same technologies that I used in my postdoc, but I am doing different things. I'm looking at a different model organism so that I can answer questions that haven't really been answered because these technologies have not been put together in this way to look at this problem.
So
But
the novelty is really the question, not necessarily the novelty of the platform.
But it could still be novelty in the platform, right? It depends. And,
Okay.
and it could work either way. It could be that you're taking these things that exist, technology-wise, but maybe you're also doing some trick, or you're putting them together in a different way that has not been done, such that you can answer a question that has not been answered before.
And showing one example of us having been able to do that, like in preliminary data, does that hurt us, or is that advantageous? Because right, because you could see, imagine one direction says okay, feasibility, but the other direction is like this is something that they're already doing.
Right. But one thing is that you're already doing it, say, in your lab, you mean, right? Not as a postdoc.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
So preliminary data from your lab, I think that's great if you have it, right? Because the eligibility window is still pretty broad. So that's great if you have preliminary data from, I mean, I don't think you will be punished for having preliminary data, right, Nicole? So that should be fine. It's more like it doesn't look like, well, you already did this, right? As long as it's
Got
not
it.
that extreme. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great response. I think the one thing that comes up a lot in the review that I hear is, is this the next logical step? Could this be easily funded by the NIH? That's a red flag. So if you feel like that's something that it's very different from that, I feel like that's probably headed in the right direction. And then just as a reminder, at the letter of intent, since it's blinded, this specific criteria is not evaluated on because they have nothing to evaluate. They don't know who you are, so they don't know your previous research. This becomes more clear at the full application stage. All right, we have a few more questions in the chat. Oh, and we have another hand raised. Let me hit up the chat because these came in a few minutes ago, and then we'll come back. So the next question is, looking at past awardees, it seems like many are life sciences oriented. Could someone developing methods instrumentation for more earth sciences / ecology applications be in scope for BYI? Absolutely. We have no funding priority for this program or truly any of the programs at the foundation. It is merely just coincidental who rises to the top at the end of the application process. But yes, those are all certainly eligible and they sound very in line with the program guidelines. It seems that we are supposed to show that this deviates from previous / existing research and also we are qualified when trying to achieve these. Will we risk violating the identity blinding rule? Thanks. I feel like you kind of touched on this, Christina. I think you just need to be careful with the way that you write the proposal. And we have a really great document on our website that gives examples on how to best state this so you don't unblind yourself. So instead of saying like my group X, you can say previous research has shown. And it's really just something as simple as that would make it so that we see feasibility, but it's not giving away who you are. Do you have anything specific that you want to suggest that worked?
No. I mean, I think that's, yep, I think that's great, right? And of course, not mentioning names but
Right.
that, yeah,
Okay.
that's good.
All right. Next question. If an applicant has an internally funded grant that is not a department-wide instrumentation grant, does it need to be included in the current funding section of the application? Internally funded grant. Just to clarify, Aaron, internally funding meaning you were only eligible within your institution. That would be considered a internal grant, and you don't have to include it anywhere. I don't think we asked for it in the application at all. So just pretend it doesn't exist for the purposes of the BYI program. Okay, there was another question to follow up for ambitious instrument / method developing. There are definitely checkpoints and steps that have to be achieved. And to some degree, those things can be done in parallel, but it's difficult to articulate what plan B is for each of those workflows in 4 pages. Should the emphasis be on the highest ambition of the project, or should we also include some conservatism in how we might proceed if one step doesn't work out? I'll let you take this one.
Yeah, I mean, propose it as right as you hope, right? It will be achieved, and then I don't think you're probably just going to have a short paragraph on alternative strategies or risk mitigation, and you may include the major ones, and it's fine to say like some of the strategies include X and Y. You don't have to be exhaustive in the same way that you would for an NIH one because you don't have the space and. But definitely don't be more conservative just, out of fear that, I don't know, that you cannot have a risk mitigation plan for every single thing that you propose. That's fine. I think that's fine. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I agree. And you had mentioned in your slides, Christina, something about they're looking even bigger picture than the 4-year. They want to know it doesn't even have to work out the way you're intending, but what will you learn along the way? Where will this take the science and, in 5-10 years? So that's something else.
And it rarely does.
Right.
It rarely does. I mean, especially when you start your lab. I mean, that's how it goes, and that's fine, right? So
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, for purposes of this program, it is fine. Okay, one more message in the chat, and then I'll go back to the hands. I know many federal agencies like hypothesis-driven proposals. Is a clear / testable hypothesis also important here? What do you think?
So I don't think so. It doesn't have to. I mean, it's not going to hurt you if that's how, how your work is typically, proposed. In my case, that we don't work this way. And when I apply often to the NIH, I, in a way, get punished just because I don't, we usually don't necessarily have a hypothesis. Of course, I could try to frame it that way, but also say that is okay, right? I am proposing an instrument. And it's more like, okay, it's going to open all of these avenues of research, but I'm also I'm not necessarily after a specific, like I don't have a specific hypothesis when it comes to what I'm going to find for now the like neurobiology related questions. So I didn't frame it that way. And I think that worked out okay. And I think that's typical for this more methods / instrument development proposal. But Nicole?
No, I agree. Certainly not required.
Yeah.
Okay, Jonathan, you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. I had a question about differentiating from postdoc work. So this is my particular situation. I'm sure it probably applies to somebody else. So during my postdoc, I was able to begin work on what would eventually become my faculty application project, sort of independently and parallel to what I was hired to do. Um, it was a big unknown. There was basically nothing published on it. So we didn't really know whether it was even a viable project until we got into it. Turns out it was very viable. We're hoping to have the first publication done, published very soon. And that is now the basis of my BYI LOI. So, how do I differentiate, I guess, the fact that this publication that will have my postdoc advisors' names on it, it's coming out of their lab, but that work will not continue in that lab. I'm taking it 100% with me. I initiated the project. I, basically did the whole project and will continue to do it. How do I differentiate that um, in a proposal that this is not a continuation of any existing work in another lab?
I mean, I think that's totally legit. You're also not going to have to justify, especially not for the LOI and in a way not for the full proposal, like how did this, come about and where did it start, right? Not really. So I think especially, right, you're saying that it's not something that your postdoc supervisor that lab will continue. So I know I think that's completely fine. I mean, I will say for my proposal, the preliminary data that I had was either from published or unpublished work from my postdoc. Because again, this was a
Okay.
collaboration that started
Hmm.
during my postdoc, but this is not something that at least that application, like the spinal cord, is not something that my postdoc PI works on. So then that was very clear, even though it did start as, as part of my postdoc work. So that is very normal and that is okay, I think, like 100% okay. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think how, especially for the LOI, how I don't think you have to worry here about anything on how you'll talk about, your previous findings, and it doesn't, you
Hmm.
don't even have to say whether they're published or unpublished, right? I guess if they're
Right.
published, you of course add a reference. If not,
Hmm.
then you can have the figure and say that it's preliminary data, but you don't have to say where whether that was taken in your postdoc lab or your own lab, correct, Nicole? Like those details,
Correct.
not,
Correct.
yeah.
And I think this will become really clear should you advance to the full application stage that this is such a departure for you from what you were doing as a postdoc.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm. All right, so we just got another question in the chat. How do you balance not giving too many experimental details and keeping the aims big picture while also conveying contingency plans? Yeah.
I
How?
know. I mean, I think this is where it helps to think, okay, it's 4 pages. The first page will have to have the background that right at the end, right? It'll have that figure, that's the big picture of limitations and goals. And there's gonna have a bit more stuff at the end. And then you'll have maybe like 3/4 of a page per aim, right? And then the ending stuff that's, the long-term vision, contingency plans, I don't know, maybe like an impact to society, like a few lines. But when you think about it in those terms, right? If you only have about 3/4 of a page per aim, including a figure, it's very little. So how do you balance that? The big picture, first of all, the big picture has to be clear, right? The big picture has to be clear. So again, now think beginning and end of each aim, right? Like where you're saying, so this is what I'm going to do. So if you only read that, you know what's happening. And then at the end, maybe you have, if successful, right? What are those possible outcomes? And then you'll fill that in, which is not going to be much space with however many details, the most important ones, right? You at least for some things you will probably able to say, okay, this I have to mention, this, yeah, probably not. And then you'll just have to prioritize which details you include. But that's okay, right? Like it's a 4-page proposal. So we know that you won't be able to include all of those details. We are assuming that you know what you're doing, this is why you're proposing it, and you're just giving us a summary of it. Yeah.
I think that's a great answer, right? You're spending less time selling itself at the LOI and more time just really emphasizing why this needs to be done. Because Christine had mentioned at the end of the day, the reviewers, especially because we have so generally a lot of LOIs and they can only advance, let's just say on average, 7 or 8 per panel. They are going to go based on obviously the review criteria, but do they want to see more? Do they think it's important enough that they want to read more about it? So I think even giving a sentence or two about contingency plan is plenty. It's just telling them that you're thinking about it. I think that's the most important thing.
Yes, and I was just looking at my LOI, and I have maybe like, what is it? It's this paragraph that has like 6 lines, just to give you a sense, but it's just one at the end. It's not like every aim has its own sort of risk mitigation plan. No, no, no. Just this one paragraph at the end. Then the longer term is also maybe like 5, 6 lines. I don't know, I had an impact, like sort of more broader impact to society that was also like a few lines. And then you have the references. I mean, and that's most of the 4th page, if you think about it. So it goes by very quickly. So then the 3 aims are about, I don't know, they do end up being like 2.5 pages. So it's very little space.
Yes, very, very little space.
Big picture, make it exciting, so that everyone understands.
Yeah, agreed. Most important. All right, we have about 5 minutes left for any final questions. All right, I'm trying to balance high risk, high reward, and feasibility. Any advice about how high risk is too high? Should the reviewers have at least 50% confidence that we will be successful?
I mean, this is really very hard to quantify, but it's fine if it feels a little uncomfortable. This is normal. Like, I mean, especially when you're starting your lab, of course, some amount of feasibility, it's good, and you probably have it, right? Because otherwise you would have not thought of this idea. So no, it's fine. I don't think reviewers try to make them excited so that they want to see your full proposal, and then so that they want to talk to you in an interview, and then they can ask those details, those things that they're not, specific things like, well, what if this doesn't work, and like, what would you do? So it's fine. Think bold, high risk, high reward, think big. If anything, it's worse to be too conservative.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. And there is no quantification of like how risky. That's not something that a risk criteria is a review criteria, but it's not like on a sliding scale. So there's no specific number in mind.
And everyone's calibrated so differently. Like, I know I'm someone who tends to very quickly feel very uncomfortable about, probably proposing things that for someone else that would feel too conservative. So this is also so subjective that you probably, if you know how you are and you tend to be like that, it's like, it's fine. It's fine if you feel a little uncomfortable. That's how science is moved forward, by thinking big. And
Agreed. It's a learning curve for the reviewers too, for sure. All right. Any final questions? Make sure no one has their hand raised. All right, I think that's it. So we'll give everyone their 2 minutes back. Cristina, thank you again so much. This was such a wonderful presentation, really helpful. Could not agree more with every single one of your slides. Thank you for being so generous and giving your contact information out. That's very, very kind. And I did record it. Cristina was generous enough to let me do that. So I'll put it on the website. You can share it with your friends. And please, just the number one takeaway, submit on time. You had mentioned, Cristina, to get the letter or the endorsements out ASAP. You can do that without having anything else in your application yet. Would we like them to see this stuff? Sure. Do they have to? No. I'd rather you have the signatures before you have anything else in there so you can at least submit. So I would do that first today if you can. So anyway, I'll end with that. But thank you again, Cristina. It was great to see you.
thank you, Nicole. Bye,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone. Thank you.